recording.
Good morning, everyone. And I spoke with Ron earlier this morning, and so I know said yesterday went really well, and tried to log in and listen on the way back up. I think the volume was kind of low, but it may be my phone. I've got a blown speaker on my phone too, but just based on the discussion from yesterday, any comments or statements or questions about what was said yesterday? I know just talking to Ron, he kind of gave me a recap of some things Nick taught yesterday and some of the discussion. But any questions or comments or where we want to pick up there?
Good morning, Ash. This is Kathy. I had asked on yesterday, Ron had made the comment that the new heaven and new earth that John was referencing in Revelations is inside of us. And I had asked them, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Richard that made the comment that it is not something that is new in the sense of something that has never been created before, but it's a new awareness to us because it was there existing, but we just weren't aware of it. And I had asked, could we talk a little bit more about that this morning to get a better understanding of that, because it kind of, well, what it did, it resonated with me, but it also made you stop and think about everything that you've been taught in religion about when I die, I'm going to heaven, because you never question why a new heaven and a new earth. We've always said that if heaven was the abode of God and earth is the abode of man, then why would you need a new heaven and a new earth? And so that just resonated with me, and I wondered if we could go ahead and talk a little bit about that this morning.
Sure. No, yeah, that was definitely one of the things Ron told me about too. And when he said that this morning, I thought back to I think when we were we briefly, while we were still in the building, we briefly talked about just the different stones, the 12 different stones, and how they all represented something different. But then we also talked about the 12 and then the gates. And I remember us having a discussion then that the new heaven and new earth wasn't necessarily multiple places, but sort of a gateway or a portal for us to cross over into a deeper understanding and awareness. And I remember us having that discussion about basically the gates and portals, but every time you face a gate, you're going into a new dimension, a new understanding of yourself, and something that you were a deeper awareness. So we definitely can pick it up from there. Any comments on that?
Good morning, yes, this is Ron. Go ahead, Pastor. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Ron.
No, sir. Go ahead. I yield to you.
Thank you, sir. Picking up on what Richard said, and I agree with that wholeheartedly, that it's not that something is going to be recreated in terms of the physicality of the earth or the spirituality of heaven. It's all about the consciousness of of men and the earth being enlightened about who they are and how we are to function in conjunction with the spiritual essence of our being. It's really what we have been talking about all along. If we were to take these 7 senses and roll all of them into one ball, then we would have another one left, and that's the 8th sense. And that 8th sense is a representation of the new heaven and the new earth, because our thought processes and our functionality is totally different when we embrace entirely the 8th sense and the reality as to what we were created to be. Thanks.
that's even looking at it from a standpoint of even in the past in the Bible. I mean, even in the Old Testament, it just dawned on me too that Melchizedek could be an example of the new heaven and new earth for when he was mentioned the two times in the Bible, because Melchizedek was king of Salem and high priest, but king of Salem is really Jerusalem. So could it be that when he had the early discussion with Abraham, that was Abraham's new heaven or new earth at that moment as well? And then also when it was presented to Jesus in that light, was that a sense of a new heaven and new earth, sort of the portal or them being opened up to a deeper concept of who they are and where they are at that point in time, and a greater awareness of their identity? Could that also be that same energy?
I think it is. And isn't that the place where we find balance? Isn't that the place where we are desiring for humanity to be inextricably tied to each other, meaning the physical and the spiritual, without there being a gap between or a lapse in thoughts in relationship to who we are? Something that has never really taken place in the earth globally, only in certain places, I suppose. However, at this juncture, I do believe that we're not close to experiencing a new heaven and a new earth. We are experiencing it. It's present right now. The only barrier is us and how we perceive it. The moment that we stop looking for it, we begin to see it, that it is currently present. Thank you.
Pastor, could you
Hello.
repeat that again? I didn't hear everything you said.
I said that the latter part of what I said was at the moment that we stop looking for the new heaven and the new earth and just embrace it, that is when we will come to the realization that it is currently present and has always been present. And the experience of it has never been globally, but now we have the opportunity for it to be global. And once it's global, then we would have fulfilled the greater things. Does that make sense?
And you're saying that it's always been present in us.
Yes, it's always been present in us. When we were brought into existence, everything that pertains to us, this physical world, spiritual world, everything was included in our creation. It's simply that in order for us to function as Elohim, we had to be given the opportunity to be dysfunctional and to correct all that dysfunctionality so we could be as Elohim is. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
I mean, bottom line is you can't be a creator if you don't create. I'm done.
Hey, y'all, it's Ron. I just want to plug in a little bit, and it's saying the same thing Pastor Ness have already said, but in looking at this, I just kind of got excited as to what is being said here. For one thing, the word new talks about to renew, to repair, to rebuild something, or to restore something. The Hebrew word for earth comes from the root, it's E-R-E-T-S, earths, and it talks about to piece something back together as you do broken pottery. So when we look at this, it really even goes back to Genesis 1, where it says the earth was voidless or had no form and formless and void rather. So how do you shape the earth? How do you do that? And even to the point where it talks about replenish and subdue it. So it's talking about something that is being renewed here, something that you have been familiar with, and not only familiar with, but something that you have shaped already, that you see that this needs a repair, or it needs to be redone and restored to its original stage. And even the Aramaic word says to pass away, to change, or to substitute something. I like it better. There was and I don't see his name, I didn't write it down. There was a 19th century uh, priest who put it this way, He looks at the word new and he says that it is akin to the word for sneeze, a tosh, that is akin to the word of sneeze. And he said and the reason why I use the word sneeze is that because when you sneeze, you are removing. Can someone please mute the phone, please? He says when you sneeze, you're actually removing something from the body that it doesn't need, something that is not supposed to be there. But not only are you removing it, you're making room for what does need to be there. So you look at this and talk the new heaven and new earth, the interior part of this. I think it is us moving, and as Pastor said, the eighth sense defines a place where these two symbols become one and the same, meaning that lofty place that you have to go in meditation becomes who you are. And we no longer have to go there or concentrate on it. It becomes who you are, and it becomes your breathing, as easy as us breathing. So I think it's a renewable thing within us that happens multiple times, or as many times as you need it to be. And it's even akin to going back to beginning as often as you need to. I'm done.
So,
And
Ron, as you say,
sorry, ST. I was just
go
going to
ahead.
add something to what Ron said. It's interesting that you said it's akin to a sneeze, because a sneeze is something that clears your airway so that you can breathe better, or you can inhale better. So yeah, it all sort of connects back to all of that. Anyway,
Yeah,
I'm
that
done.
makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
That's one of the other things I thought about before, prior to this, and I'm going back a year, because we also talked about the no longer the sea, and how we looked at that politics and religions aspect, and could that also be a barrier that we crossed over at that point when we say new heaven and new earth, because the old one passed away. And we always talk about heaven as being the presence of God, which that presence is in us, but we have to also uncover it and be aware of it for ourselves. So when that new heaven and new earth there's also a lot of things that we've gotten over, and when you talk about that battle from within, and the things of going back to the beginning. So new heaven and new earth, that is at the point where we were at the ultimate part of our beginning. And from that memory and that past and that beginning, we're able to create based on that, I guess, a greater sense of purity from that standpoint, because of the awareness of who we are. And so that creating from that purity standpoint is the also the new heaven and new earth, that appearance, because now that balance, like you said, is still there. But we've gotten to the ultimate part of beginning in ourselves, and from there, anything we create going forward is really truly based on a total understanding of our identity and who we are and how we affect things around us. Could you touch on that a little more?
As you were talking there, something came to mind, and that is the new heaven, new earth experience is an experience where we will be free from the governmental rule of men, and we will be experiencing the governmental rule influenced by the principles of our Creator. Right now, the earth, the world is governed by men who bring into existence those things which are beneficial to them and not to humanity. However, the inverse of that would be bringing into existence a governing body or governing thoughts that are beneficial to everyone. And I don't just mean in a physical way, I'm talking about spiritual as well. So when we talk about this concept of balance and this concept of new heaven and new earth, we are actually, I do believe with everything in me, speaking of a period of time when spiritual thought, spiritual essence, spirituality period governs the entire earth by being the influencer of men. And again, the moment that we embrace that, that is the moment that we will begin to see a clearer vision of it and to experience it in a greater way. My insight in that comes from the idea that the highest court in the land, now populated by an African woman, that's not just about making sure that the Constitution is evenly administered. This is a message from the Creator. If all life came from that womb, then now we're beginning to see an infusion of that life, that new earth, that new heaven come into being. It's not about her sitting on the court as much as it is about spirituality being the governing body of the earth, if that makes sense. I'm done for now.
No, it does. And I mean, we going back to the gateway and just the step back to how we get to that point of awareness. It seems like everyone in the Bible went through that, and if you sit back and think about if they reflected on what they had accomplished and what was lying ahead of them, and just take Abraham for instance, he had just conquered his enemies within, and exterior through war, and so he had just gotten over that. And so he was sort of at the height of what he thought was accomplishment, and then at that height of accomplishment, you're asked to start all over again because of everything you've been exposed to and now that moving forward. And so it's the same thing for us. Like we get to the height of education or a professional career or just a status that we get to the place where we think we're comfortable in the earth, and then you realize that hey, that's fine, that's good, but that's nothing now. And then you become aware of what you need to be moving forward because you've gone back and we think we've come full circle, but you've gone back and looked at yourself and looked at where you are, and you realize, okay, now I'm back at the beginning. I understand my identity. I understand all the battles that I've done within myself and outside to whether it be studying, classroom, whatever. You've got to the height of for us, it's like we've accomplished what we think we should have accomplished in life, and then now all of a sudden you're at the beginning of something else, and now you realize that okay, your legacy going forward is what are you doing for things that are going on around you, and not necessarily what you've had to fight to accomplish. And that's sort of that energy now, that it's a new energy that kind of governs things around us in our, I guess, in our realm, in our area. And then now that identity is driving you, not so much your accomplishments from the past. But even with the Supreme Court now, that it seems like it was going to be a big fight, but it really wasn't. It kind of fizzled, and she's there. And like I said, that now that energy sits forward, and it's just like now we could see things that are going to be created from that, and how things will be done based on where she sits and everything that comes from that. Now we get to really see a different type of creation, if that makes sense.
I tell you, I guess I see. I don't know. Do you guys feel this? I'm getting to a place where I kind of feel the lessons. You're experiencing them as we go through it. And the thing is, I listen to what you're saying, and it's hard to be intuitive without feeling it, without connecting to it. And I'm as we look at this lesson, and again, I go back to Genesis 1, where it talked about the earth being formless. If you can think of raising a child and you want to instill values in that child, morals and godly principles, and you also want to, there are other things, safety things and earthly things that the kid has to know, educational things, and you want to balance all of that, and that becomes extremely important to you. And even in your disciplinary opportunities, you have to consider, am I in a bad mood? What mood am I in? I don't want to take this out on my child. Maybe I need to wait until I feel better before I talk to him or her. And you're constantly balancing who you are based on what is best for that child and your family. And so I look at it from that perspective, that replenishing the earth or reshaping the earth is a tremendous responsibility. And it is not given to any and everybody. So it is given to Elohim. And even though everybody has equal chance to recognize that, it is not done by the population. So the place that we are is tremendous to me. All that it means, I don't have a clue, but it is a rich and powerful place, responsibility, and I feel good about it. I just like where we are. So when you compare it to Melchizedek, not only being the king, but being the priest, that is our responsibility. And all the things going on in politics, all the wars going on, all the killings and shootings that you see, all of those things fall under this umbrella. So that shaping of a formless earth has begun, and that has me excited. So I just want to add, I just feel this lesson. I really do. I feel good about this, where we are.
So do I. And may I add one thing to what Ron said? I'm sorry, Pastor. Did you want to go ahead and say something?
Go ahead. Go ahead. I'll say it later.
I was just going to add one thing, because when Ron talked about monitoring and adjusting yourself constantly to think about what would be best for like your child, I'm beginning to, through experience, the various experiences that I'm living through, I'm learning that we even have to do that for your quote unquote, and I'm going to use this term loosely because I don't believe I have any enemies, but those who do not have your best interests at heart. Let me say it that way, because I don't want to say enemy. you even have to do the same thing where they are concerned. And that, to me, I can see easily doing that for my child. But when it is someone that does not have my best interests at heart, and I still have to sit and think about what is the best thing for me to do for this person so that I can help them to see that they're Elohim too, because they don't know they are. That is even more challenging. And so, like Ron, I'm excited about this lesson, but I just wanted to add that piece as well.
Yeah.
Great conversation. Thank you, Kathy.
Suppose for a moment that the speed with which we begin to see the balance that exists currently or that has always existed. Suppose the challenge to that is resolving the conflicts within us. If we have been chosen to usher in an awareness of the balance that currently exists, to usher in an eye-opening experience of a new heaven and new earth, then suppose the only barrier to that is the conflict that's housed in those who've been chosen to open the eyes of the earth, the eye of humanity, rather. And by conflict, I mean the struggles we have with disliking policies that come from the government, or the struggles we have with being angry with people who, as Kathy said, don't have our best interests at heart, or people who seek to relegate us to a status of inferiority, and who do not see us as being humans or worthy of being protected or looked upon as an equal. Once those conflicts within us are resolved, then the resolution to them comes for mankind as a whole, wouldn't you think? Okay.
Let me add this to what Pastor said. That's now I'll give it to you. I just want to say to show you your own. Remember a couple of years ago when we first got our hands on the hidden gospel and we were in that pretty heavy. That's all he talked about. And we talked about that for the longest time, looking at lessons on quieting those voices, or stealing the peace that's in you, finding that peaceful place that's in you, and how important that was so that you can see further and make room for the enlightenment was to come. So yeah, I see that very clearly. Thank you, S.
Oh, no problem. I'm going to go back and look at what Kathy said, and then look at what we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Like if we take a real look at the accomplishments and trying to make, because our goal has been to survive and make the best life possible for ourselves. So, our goal is going to, survive, put yourself in the best position, all those things, that inner battle, the things we accomplish, it all comes on the heels of the decisions that we make. We try to always make the right decision. We always say, well, do the right thing or make the right decision. And so a lot of that rolled up into our survival is what we thought we should be fighting for, our survival. And based on like what Kathy just said, instead of like trying to do things in the best interest of our immediate circle, how do we balance that moving forward? And I'm saying now at this point, we've done all we can do to survive and realize we've got this accomplishment. But moving forward, the only thing that we should be concerned about is creating a righteous environment. And if we do that, everyone under that umbrella benefits from it. So it's a shift in mindset when we look at ourselves as individuals, trying to do what's best for us and getting to a certain position and surviving and making a good life, quote unquote, for ourselves. What if now we really have to understand that we just need to create righteousness for our environment, and that righteousness is going to benefit everyone involved and everyone under it, and not necessarily just our immediate circle. But if we shift the focus on moving away from concerns about our survival or creating that good life or living the good life or doing what's right, and just focus on our creation being from that source that we talked about, that flow of energy and just creating righteousness. So just like the kingdom principles, everything underneath that will benefit because it's all done based on the energy we have from the source. And if we look at our own individual life and the battles, like you said, from within past, like we've done a lot of stuff, right or wrong, for the overall society. We've done stuff to ensure that we've had a good life, and we try to make the right decision based on what we perceived as getting ahead or accomplishing or arriving. And then you arrive and you're like, okay, I understand this thing totally different, because you now see your identity that was behind the curtain, so to say, and now that drives you in that new, renewed energy and that new concept, that new heaven is now saying, just create a righteous environment and everything else will be okay. And that's like our shift of new heaven, new earth, because we fought so hard to get to a certain place and to survive and to accomplish, and we thought we've done the right thing along the way. Well, now we shift that balance to forming a righteous environment that's going to just change the whole outcome of whatever is moving from that beyond that point. Does that make sense?
It does.
It does. I think we have to use that same zeal if to get to this place of righteousness within that we use to get to the place that you were speaking of is.
Yeah.
Because you cannot create a righteous environment if the righteousness is not who you are, because whoever you are, that's the environment you create. And I'll give you an example. Have you been in a mall or in the presence of someone and you felt uncomfortable because they were creating an environment, not one so much of fear but of danger, or creating an environment of discomfort, and you moved away from that energy? I see us as being those who have great opportunity to dispel all of the conflicts within, so that the only space within is filled with righteousness, and therefore created exponentially an environment of righteousness that expands far beyond our physical presence. Thank you.
No, definitely, because and the thing that this earth and religion taught us is that we never wanted to overspend. We wanted to be as safe as possible. None of us wanted to take the L or a loss. And it always taught us that, you better be there because you don't want to miss out on something. And so, that whole concept was always centered around not being left behind or taken advantage of or missing out on something. And so you were always fighting so hard to be in and trying not to miss out. And all those things just kind of distracted you from, going back to the beginning of who your true identity was. And then when you slow down and you take the time to go back, follow the breadcrumbs, whatever you want to say, go back to the beginning, and then you realize that all those things that you were fighting so hard to not miss out on, or not lose anything, or not overpay, or not overextend, really did that to you, because you were so far left in trying to prevent those things from happening that it removed you away from the search of who you are. And that's that inner fight that we all have gone through, because nobody wanted to take an L for anything, And so every time we fought hard to do that or hold on to something that wasn't really real for us, you were denying yourself the awareness or the opportunity to find out who you are. And so now we've quit denying ourselves, and we've been able to fight that internal fight, to move forward or move backwards, how you want to look at it. That ability for us to not deny ourselves anymore has opened up that new heaven, new earth, that gate for us, because we truly understand that all the things we're fighting now not to lose and not to miss out on didn't even matter at that point. And so now, going forward, you're able to, kind of create a new experience for yourself and others, and bring your mind and other minds to an awareness, knowing who you are. And that's like the biggest thing, really, because all those things take away from us because we deny our identity when we're chasing that stuff.
Yes, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about yesterday too. The European mindset versus the African mindset. And I think Nick can probably explain it better than me, but so take over, Nick. We can't hear you, Nick. You sound like a chipmunk. I guess he needs to get off, but anyway, we were talking about how the European mindset being such that there a lot of talk and okay, go ahead, Nick.
Do I sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, we mentioned the difference between these sort of underlying European mentality and the underlying African mentality, and that when Africans were brought over to the United States, which is quote unquote a Western sort of dominated space, a Western dominated atmosphere, the energy surrounding this place is Western dominated, which really means European dominated. It is a different underlying energetic environment than one that exists in other places in the world that were not as influenced or colonized by that mindset, by that energy that is being produced and connected to by that underlying European mindset. And it's a little bit like everything that you do within the context of this mindset that sort of isn't organic or endemic to Africans or other kinds of people who are not European. Everything you do feels like you're walking upstream or swimming upstream, or you're having to resist this flow that doesn't come from you and isn't the direction your own sort of personality, spirit, and mentality naturally would flow. And so it's not just that you are forced to do work and forced to be subservient, it's that the energy atmosphere is attempting to transmute you into something that you can't be. Well, rather, it's very difficult to attempt to change who you naturally want to be, I should say. And that's why it feels on a spiritual level like such a burden to do anything when you're within this environment. And that's not to say that it most certainly doesn't make anything impossible. It just adds another layer of what must be dealt with when you are investigating the nature of the self and the nature of your spiritual relationship to your environment and everything in it. And the sort of mentality that I speak of, originating mostly in Europe, is not necessarily a bad one. It just is more what we would call analytical. It is more concerned with the description of objective and physical sensory information, rather than the underlying African mentality, which is instinctively uses the spiritual as its source for understanding, rather than the European, which is the sort of intellectual or analytical. And this varies from person to person, of course, but when you look at populations and groups of people, you can see these patterns begin to rise to the surface, and you can have a better understanding of why it seems so difficult for Europeans in particular to get on a wider cultural level, why it seems so difficult for them to get it, if you know what I mean. And it's easier for Africans to get it because the method that you use more organically, more instinctively, is one that is more correct for interfacing with the reality of what this experience is, what spirit is, of what everything is. And that's the dilemma, or at least one layer of it, is how do we get that mentality to release its rigidity so that it can once again receive from something more fundamental and more beneficial ultimately to its understanding of itself. And let me say this, that sort of underlying European mentality, as I said, isn't necessarily, it's not inherently bad, but we are sort of living in the way that it gets confused. And it's quite possible for that underlying African mentality to become confused. It just becomes confused in a different way. But in terms of being able to connect to spirit and being able to draw from that source that resolves all confusion, what is more necessary is what the mentality that Africans more naturally connect to, or more instinctively, I should say. And that is what we're all trying to do, is learn how to strengthen that connection and learn how to draw from spirit more consciously in order to bring some order to the confusion that we see or that we experience within our own selves as well.
So Nick, it's Ron. On the heels of something you said, you said the European gained it, and correct me if I say this wrong, gain his understanding in an analytical way, and the African is more a spiritual intuition kind of thing, intuitive kind of thing. Now, think about us as African Americans. We are right in the middle of both of those worlds, two different types of consciousness. Is that what, looking at it from a higher plane, from a different place, is that why we're here? Is that the reason for this, that we are to bridge those two gaps to bring about understanding? Because I think, as somebody said yesterday, or maybe I heard this on something else, I don't know. Those are the two worlds. I might have been Catherine me talking. Those are the two worlds that, if those two worlds come together, then the rest of the world finds its balance. So is that a part of what we're doing here? Because I have searched for that answer for so long, because it just seems like we're the only people on the globe that are out of place. And it's just something that's been important to me. What do you think about that? Does that give us some special reasoning for being here?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it does. And I said this yesterday in some other version of Earth, in some other universe, when the Europeans, Africans, and Native Americans and everybody met in America, they got it right. They sat down, had a nice little kumbaya cultural exchange, and the rate of acceleration towards enlightenment on a global scale was much greater than it is on this planet. But guess what? We have this planet. And so our situation is exactly that. Wherever the greatest potential for igniting the spark of enlightenment for humanity as a whole, wherever that greatest potential is, that's where the most amount of introspection and ability to draw from your own spirit and accelerate your own process of enlightenment must happen. And it's destiny apparently made it this country more so than other ones. And that's probably not exactly true, but in our experience, we have a greater amount of influence, either negative or positive, and mostly negative, unfortunately, over the rest of the world. So guess what? It's our responsibility to do that here, now, at this time.
Yep. When we went to Philadelphia several years back, and George had us out at the park. We talked about the African proverb of Ubuntu, and my humanity is kind of tied to yours. If I have, then we all have. So that's something physical or spiritual mainly. And I just, when you were saying that, Nick, I was just sort of thinking back to that when we talking about the concept of Ubuntu. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it right. But it was just, we were just sort of out there, kind of meditating and just kind of soaking up energy. And that was sort of the thought. I don't know if you guys remember when we were at the park and just that time we were reflecting of just, I am, because, my humanity is tied to yours. And so therefore we're kind of connected. And so when you were saying that, I sort of thought back to that and just, how that all applies to us and how it all should govern our actions, our thoughts, and everything else. But when you were saying that, I just thought back to that day.
Yes,
Yes.
this is Barbara. Good morning, everybody. As I listen to what you're saying, new heaven, new earth, new consciousness, new way of seeing with the eye instead of the eyes. And then Ron talked about African Americans feeling out of place. And we literally do feel out of place, because if we go back to what we learned about heaven and earth, when we were talking about the hidden gospels, earth came from the word Shemaiah, a word that means light, a word that means a vibration, and so it has to do with the sacred vibration that cuts across all time, all space, all beings. It also means that vibration that connects us all. Whereas earth also does not talk about just this celestial ball that we live on, this physical, but it talks about nature and everything that has form in this physical world. So when we were talking about the two creations in the beginning, they were representatives of the two creations in mankind. One being that thought of our being physical, earthly. The other being the notion that we were spiritual, heavenly. The physical, when we thought about being physical, we thought, well, everything evolved around manifestation of who we are, meaning the physical being of who we were. And as Nick was talking, he was talking about that European consciousness, if you will, that has permeated everything that we, through ages, learned about ourselves. And we were trying to be forced, if you will, for lack of a better word, into this manifestation of the definition of who Europeans were, meaning analytical, meaning selfish, meaning intellectual, meaning looking from everything from the person perspective, the physical perspective. If I can't see it, I can't believe it kind of perspective. So we were being forced in that kind of mindset. But on the other hand, as Ron said, we always felt out of place. And that out of placeness means that we knew that we were more than that. We knew we were more than what you saw. We knew that we were more than just individually how we present ourselves and set our own personal goals. We were more than that. And the heaven part of that has to do with that vibration also that connects us all. We knew we were connected to everything. And being connected to everything pulls us out of being just that physical manifestation of the way we saw ourselves into being that spiritual manifestation of not being just us, but being everybody and everything else as well. And so that's where the out of placeness was. We were trying to be boxed up, as Nick said, into this kind of mindset of the definition of what the Europeans define as what was right, what was important, and we knew that, as you said, Nick, they could not transmute us into that because we knew we were, quote unquote, out of place. Because we are that connection. We are that connection that bridges both earth and heaven, physical and spiritual, that which vibrates and touches everything in the universe, and that which manifests diversity in everything in the earth, in a sense. So the passing away then, earth and heaven and earth passing away, has very much to do with what we talked about already. The consciousness of being aware, knowing beyond knowing that we were more than the physical of what we see. And I think, what's his name? In the Hidden Gospel, this guy, what's his name? He said it beautifully. He said, I'm just translating a little bit, but every person has a unique note in the universal symphony. No one else can strike yours except you. And so in the earthly realm, in the European's perspective, we are all trying to be the symphony of one. There is no symphony of one. We only understand the beauty of how we all connect when we understand that every single individual in its individuality adds to the connectedness of the oneness of the whole. And so each one of those individual notes is necessary for the symphony, the beauty of the music created by the symphony. And that's what draws us in, does it not? That's what music does. That's the music of the soul. It's what helps us know that we are out of place because we are not functioning as the one connected being that we are. Sorry, said a lot to say to that, but that's it.
No, good morning,
Yeah, yeah.
everyone. Barbara, I appreciate, what you said because it reflects on us being able to appreciate the I am that we are. And if Elohim is everything and everything is Elohim, as we talk about a new heaven and a new earth, it just makes me, meditate in terms of appreciating, what existed before the beginning existed. And I think that if we, can appreciate, spirituality before religion, I believe that we are searching and seeking for the resurrection of truth, that we're able to come into the knowledge and the wisdom, that we are one yet many. However, our experiences in terms of going to beginning, we're seeing it in the manifestations of the two cosmic laws of the Kushite and Kemetic kingdom. And it says, I am the creator having a human experience. However, the second cosmic law is I am to treat the creator's creation as I treat the creator in me. And so if I am love, if I am who I am says I am, then I believe that we are, coming into a unified awareness in terms of us being able to appreciate what ST has put out in the macro when we understand the eight senses. But looking at the eighth one in particular, and I think, Ron, you alluded to it earlier when you talked about, the birth of a child or being able to, teach that in terms of a child understanding. And I think that if we look at the eighth sense, and in my actual reality, being able to bear witness to a baby coming into life form in that way where the child or the baby is trying to develop their, of enhancing their senses. And again, and I apologize, I'm trying to take my time with this. When I look at my granddaughter who's 2 months old, and I look at her in her eyes, there's a characteristic of her sense that I believe she's trying to communicate in her own way. She can't do it verbally necessarily in terms of the words that we understand, but I think in terms of her sense, her intuition, there is that communication that exists that, again, I quite can't explain it, but I think that it comes back to the fact that we all, appreciate that there's only one race, the human race. And so as I begin to, think about what's being said, I realize that I am because we are, but I think I desire to go back to beginning. And again, as I, continue to search for the truth, as I continue to search the significance of my life, I realize that, I need to go back to beginning that Ron has, frequently expressed, and I'm beginning to experience it in a way where I can appreciate where we are in our life journey. So again, I'm just so grateful, to, understand it from the creation stories. And as we talked about Genesis 1, and the Spirit of God moved upon the waters, I believe that, again, there's something that is resonating with all of us. And I think that it's coming into manifestation in terms of us being the creators that we are, and not necessarily, as you say, Barbara, looking at it in terms of self-ego, but realizing that we all are one yet many. So I just wanted to share those thoughts in terms of just I am because we are, and ST, you are correct, it is Ubuntu. And I think that, again, looking at the origin of things is so important for me, I know, and I'm beginning to appreciate, our history. I'm beginning to appreciate who the Creator created us to be. And, I think it's just so much to be thankful for. So I just wanted to share those thoughts, and hopefully I didn't deviate from what was being said. I'm done.
Thank you, thank you. I was sitting there thinking, and overall, even when Nick was speaking, about the European influence, and the one thing I kept thinking was, out of all the look at this country and how things were formed, out of all the major cities around from the West Coast to East Coast, there's sort of a formal assimilation that was given to certain cultures. If you look at a lot of the cities, you have Chinatown, you have Germantown, you have your Little Italies, you have your Irish, you have your Jewish communities. It's a little different from the African perspective. So, I'm wondering if that's, well, not wondering, things are sort of like happened on purpose, because there was, we didn't have a formal assimilation, and we fought in some areas to try and assimilate. But like when the Asians came to the West Coast early on, they were basically given a choice to assimilate or suffer the consequences, and so there was a quicker integration and assimilation with them. And I look around, I wonder if this is why we have some of these communities that are in all these towns. But for us, because we are so much closer to beginning than any other culture, it's made it that much different for us when we talk about going back to beginning, because we're so close to beginning in comparison to our brothers and sisters, culturally. And that goes back to another aspect of why so much things are different for us. So many things are different for us, and there's a different demand on us. And as Nick was talking, and as Barbara was, I just thought about the assimilation that took place in different cultures, and then we so quickly assimilated or adopted religion, but now that we're really taking a step back from that and sort of going back to the beginning, it's a little easier for us to understand that concept culturally, because we were so much closer to beginning. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? But that was just going to my mind when you guys were speaking. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, this is Nick again. Just, I think one of the way in which that underlying sort of instinctive African connection to spirituality becomes confused is within religion and religiousness, in the sense that it is pageantry, disconnected from all real transformation of self. And I think one of the way in which the sort of underlying European or sort of analytical mindset becomes confused is within sort of objective scientific information and ritual, in a sense. Basically science that is completely disconnected from the knowledge that we are all one and connected, and that we are not inanimate, dead physical matter. And that applies to everything, even rocks. But the sort of confusion in that analytical European mindset is to see everything as dead physical matter, and therefore it doesn't matter how you behave towards it. But I wanted to, something from just a fun thing to think about. I think it is more fundamental and more useful for the purposes of being here in this physical experience, and for the purposes of pursuing enlightenment and the the purpose for which we are here at all, it is more useful to have that African underlying mindset. It is more useful to have your sense of spiritual connection. And I say that because I said that the sort of underlying European mindset, or basically the analytical, quote, scientific, objective stuff, isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the spiritual sense is more fundamental and more useful for getting humanity to where we are destined to be. And it's you can see that sort of in the physical metaphor that is your body, because your body is an expression of spiritual concepts. And if you take a look at your heart in your body, your heart is on your left side. And if we consider the left and the right side to be masculine and feminine, or European and African, or whatever sort of opposite ends of the spectrum you want to put on that example, there's something that's slightly off balance in a sense, but it is balanced towards the spiritual. It is biased towards the spiritual. All of reality itself is biased towards the process of enlightenment and the process of remembering that we are all one. And you can see that because your heart is on the left. The thing that beats life through your body physically is the metaphor for the spiritual source of life, the thing that keeps the life energy moving and flowing. And all of this is biased towards spirit. It is biased towards the African mentality, or I should say, it is biased towards the mentality that comes more instinctively to Africans, which is the natural desire to draw from spiritual and intuitive awareness. And you can get lost in the trying to define exactly what the left side and the right side and all that stuff exactly means and who it applies to and what it applies to, but don't worry about that. It's more about the overall metaphor and the concept. But I will say that the Latin word for left, like the left side, is sinister. So the reason the word sinister has a negative connotation, like when we say sinister, it means something bad, is because the confusion that is present on the left side of the brain, which is your more analytical, quote, scientific, objective part of the brain, the confusion that produces is that much more destructive and that much more against the natural flow of things. And that's why when that European mentality becomes confused or corrupted, it produces such a negative reaction or such a negative rejection of its sort of other half. But I just thought that was interesting to point out, because these kind of words and physical metaphors, these physical symbols, are present within our daily experience if we have the wherewithal to recognize them.
It's a case for compassion for the Lindsey Grahams and all of those folk who seem to intensely feel strongly about the African in any sense, whether it's voting rights or whether it's or whether it's the first African on the Supreme Court. So you just beautifully described what we see every single day. So now it helps us look beyond the physical to get in touch with what spiritually is happening. Thank you for that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Is that why we're so tired and drained? Because we're having to carry everything and everybody? Because I don't know about anybody else, but I am drained mentally, and it's hard to sleep. I don't sleep well. And when I listen to what you guys are talking about, it's like we're having to carry the whole world on our shoulders.
May I address that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hopefully someone else will help me. However, when Evelyn started talking, it gave was a clear vision for a question that was raised to me. The connection between the number 7 and the tribe that the Exodus speaks of, when it talks about the group who were not given the privilege of carrying their belongings on a wagon. And the explanation for it, when they thought the Creator about it, was you are not given those because your shoulders are strong. When Nick was talking about the African being the closest to beginning, I think it was Nick who mentioned that, but anyway, someone did, being to beginning, that being the case, and 7 speaking to the completion of creation, then that would indicate to me anyway that the brunt of what is to be carried for the benefit of humanity is on the shoulders of those who are closer to beginnings, because those who are closer to beginnings are closer also to becoming Elohim becoming flesh. And being the closest to it means that there is greater responsibility to bring insight to those who seems to be the farthest away from it. And in doing so, it would bring about a sense of exhaustion, not only because of the physical labor we engage in, but because of the spiritual undertakings that we have embraced. The body feels exhaustion because of the weight of the spirit, and the weight of the spirit is so heavy now, not because it is an individual is occupying an individual body. It's because we are carrying the load of humanity and have embraced that. And by embracing it, we now are beginning to experience the weightiness of that load. And the experience of the weightiness of that load reminds us constantly of the magnitude of responsibility that we have to rid ourselves of previous erroneous convictions and embrace the sense of righteousness. And in doing so, it rids us of all the conflicts that I mentioned earlier that we have. But at the same time, it makes our responsibility more vivid to us, and that vivid responsibility automatically creates a sense of heaviness, and we don't have the luxury of having assistance in carrying it, because there are very few who even want to know about it, let alone be an assistant in carrying that load. There are so few of us who have made the determination to walk under the weight of it, regardless of how heavy it gets, until it really is seemingly a burden, but a righteous burden, as opposed to one that is there to weaken or destroy us. Thank you. Any questions or comments about that?
Yeah,
But does
I don't
that
have.
not,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Barbara.
what you just said, does that not, is that not the impetus for us being continually connected to that spiritual component? Because that's where we draw strength from. Any strength that we get from that aspect. And if we didn't draw any strength from that aspect, we would not be able to bear the load that we have to bear. So we have to stay in tune with and aware of who we are to keep that load in perspective. Otherwise, we could potentially allow it to press upon us to the extent that it would crush us.
I agree with that, Barbara, 100%. And the load becomes easier to carry. The load becomes a lighter weight when we, the more we separate ourselves from the self-imposed weights that we carry. And that again entails those conflicts that we have. Today we are up, the next day we're down. And today we want to carry this load, tomorrow we want to give up. Today we are happy about being chosen to do this. Tomorrow we are asking, why me? All of these things that we face are opportunities for us not only to become stronger, but also to lighten the load by virtue of unloading those things that we have gathered upon ourselves through previous teachings and through previous experiences, as well as previous decisions that we made. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Yeah. Again, definitely that helps. And, I want to just respond to something, Pastor, that you mentioned in terms of that, we need to do something about the gun violence, in Philadelphia. And as I, listen to what Evelyn mentioned in terms of just how heaviness, can come upon us in terms of those things that we have to deal with. And, I can just, recall, looking at, Monday, April the 4th, and just reflecting on Friday, April the 8th. And the numbers 4 and 8, are numbers that are dear, to my spirit, that Pastor I know I've spoken to you about in terms of, creation and new beginnings. But I felt the heaviness, this week in terms of a young man in our program who had got shot in the head a year ago, and dealing with his recovery and just the fact that he was shot again on Thursday. And as I reflect on the gun violence and just looking at it from a spiritual perspective, because I know in the natural, again, I was just totally, the heaviness was on me. And I wanted to, again, just draw on the strength of Elohim. And at the same time, again, look at, the whys, and then at the same time, just beginning to try to get answers. And to make, again, a long story short, not only did this gentleman get shot twice, but his brother actually got shot the week before. And we know about people, places, and things. I think there's things that we're dealing with, in the world. However, spiritually, what does it mean? And I think to be able to draw on the strength of Elohim and being able to appreciate us being able to, spiritually put things out there in the macro. I know that what has helped me to deal with my heaviness was to appreciate, the senses and the things that are being shared in terms of us being able to realize that I'm not fighting this battle alone. We're not, in terms of just individuals, but collectively, that energy needs to be shared in a way that we can draw and pull from each other. So again, I think there's things that are happening in all of our lives. But I truly believe that, because we're able to appreciate, the mind, body, soul, and spirit connection. And as Nick, talked about in terms of looking at things from the physicality, but knowing that there is the spirituality aspect, there is the mental awareness, in terms of us being able to see for such a time as this. I think we are called to be prepared, or to be in that oneness of being able to bring resolve. So I just wanted to share those thoughts because I felt the heaviness too, Evelyn, in terms of my own personal experience. But I know that it's for a purpose for us to be able to bring healing to our universe, to our world. So I just wanted to share those thoughts. I'm done. And any enlightenment that anybody may have.
I think we have, as individuals and as creators, we've grown so much from the standpoint because, we came into this thing looking for answers, and religion in general, the church, the first thing they did was separate us. And they separated us from ourselves, and then they separated us from each other because we constantly taught that our identity doesn't matter, who we are doesn't matter, that we were constantly taught that the church as the institution is the most important thing. And so therefore there was always that separation from us, and we always looked at things as third party involvement, and we were always like shifting things towards that church institution. And now we've understood that, our identity is really important because that's who we are, and that connection is the way that, so now instead of preaching to people and telling them, hey, you need to go to church, that the church is this institution that's going to make everything better. We're talking to people about awareness of who they are, and that's our biggest challenge, is bringing the next person to an awareness of who they are, to kind of end that cycle, so to say. And we say it so easily, but it isn't as easily said as done. But our job now, instead of promoting an institution, is to lift that cover off our connection that we thought was so broken and scattered. And now we just have to bring people to an awareness of who they are, 1 by 1, 10 by 10, whatever it takes. And so it is a bit of a burden in that regard, because you're fighting two systems. And but I think we just have to really in each individual take each opportunity to show by example, by just uncovering things for people, and bring each other to just, that's why I think Rev said it a couple of weeks ago, it's so important for us to do this together, because you can't do it in isolation. We need each other. And so no matter what level or what stage someone is in that point in their life, it's a constant job for us just to bring them to an awareness of who they are. And then that will open that gate for them to even walk through, and they start understanding what kind of power they have. And then if they can do that for someone else who's in their inner circle, that's not in the place that where they're at, it's just like everybody's taking one step up the ladder. But it's our job, and it's our focus to stay true to it. It's got to all be based on our identity. And the difficult part was just moving away from that mentality of supporting the church, who told us that we weren't, individuals, but now shifting that to the individual and getting that individual to understand who they are by a bunch of different methods. It's just not one way to it, but that's our challenge, I guess, so to say. And so when you have someone that, something happens to them repeatedly, it's difficult to kind of bring them to that place of understanding who they are, but it's just a constant fight of still trying to get that person to an awareness of who they are, and so that at some point they realize what kind of impact they have on their environment. A lot of people walk around and feel like they don't have any impact on anything, and so that's that constant struggle and challenge for us, is to bring them to an awareness of who they are and their true identity, and where everything on the outside used to be just you've got to don't worry about your identity, but uplift the church, if that makes sense.
So you've come full circle back to Kathy's original question of heaven and earth, and what it is we're about, and it is helping other people see that in themselves. And when we collectively understand that consciousness of connectedness, and we're not alone, and it's not about just a place, a building, but it's about that which we are, the Elohim that we are, where the essence is a part of who we are. That's part of the heaven and earth. And when people see that in us, it draws them as well to ask, okay, how can I have what you have? Which is that essence of Elohim, the heaven on earth kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they see it in the simplest form too. It's not something that we make look complicated. And that's the other part of it. We need to make it look as simple as possible, because, church can get complicated sometimes, and don't know when to knee, to stand, to clap, or, so by simplifying that to you and just doing it, being an example and being who we are, when we're supposed to be it, and how we're supposed to be, it just makes it, easier because it's authentic.
I would like to make a comment. I heard, Mrs. Evelyn, I heard what Barbara just said, and everything what everybody's saying makes sense. And when you guys were talking just now, I thought about how a duck is on the water, which is one of my favorite animals. The duck just glides on the water. But if you really look underneath, you can see that duck is pedaling, just, constantly pedaling to get to where it needs to be. And on the surface, it looks like, again, that it's just gliding to us, but they're under there. We know that there's work that's being done. So that's what I just saw when you were talking. And then I thought about the scripture where with Peter, how somebody was saying something that they wanted what he had. I think this is Peter, but anyway, he says, silver and gold, I have none, but I don't know what the exact words of that is, but that's what I see as you guys are talking. I'm done.
Such that I have, I give unto you.
Pastor, I got a question. This is Rika. Going back to what Ms. Evelyn said about carrying the load and being so exhausted, could it be because we're trying to carry, we think we're carrying something, but we're really dragging stuff along, some things that we shouldn't even be trying to pick up and carry? And that's just making us so drained and tired?
I think it's two things, Rika. I think it's the things that we are carrying, that we should actually free ourselves of. That's the conflicts. But more importantly, I think what we miss is that we make an attempt to carry everybody else's conflicts as well, as opposed to focusing on how we can resolve our own conflicts and then guide others in resolving theirs, as opposed to pretending they're not there, being silent about them instead of addressing them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So
And
in
so the
saying
silence,
that, carrying, trying to work on and carrying what's in the immediate, what's in your immediate circle surroundings. And then when you're able to handle that, then you can start to versus trying to carry everything else, kind of drag it along. Does that make more, drag it along with you until they're ready to come up for support?
well, first of all, we are not really carrying our own. And we shouldn't be carrying as much as we should be resolving. Resolution doesn't come sometimes because we don't want to hurt someone's feelings. We don't want to say what we really know should be said. We don't want to do what we know we really should do. And that's the dragging. When you know you should say something or do something and you don't, then the load becomes heavier. And then you lose sight not only of the conflicts within you that you need to deal with, but you also lose sight of yourself, your identity, and you begin to identify with the issues that you're dragging along to someone else. Does that make sense? Not just Tarika, but to the rest of you.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just that, okay, so when you said about not you seeing it but not saying anything or not responding to it, but when you are,
But you're not, if you're dragging it, you're not responding to it, you're recognizing it's there, but you're not doing anything about it.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Someone else, anyone else? Can I see that more in depth tonight, or see something different there?
No, and Reverend, it also goes back to what we've talked about early on, is how we go about doing things too. You know, if we're constantly trying to fix things and try to help people fix things by always constantly teaching them how to fix it from external matters and not really doing it from, internally and taking that internal perspective, then we'll be carrying people a lot longer too. But the quicker we can kind of learn to approach it and also offer solutions that come from internal answers, which get more at the root and the heart of the problem anyway. If we try to constantly do things from the outside, it's that much longer of a journey. So if we go back to the whole concept of ascents and realize it always starts from within, because at one point or another, or some point in our life, we have to take that internal fight, and we have to do it from a perspective of total understanding of who we are, total honesty of who we are, where we're at, accepting the status, and building off that and moving forward. And it makes that journey and the carrying of things a lot easier and shorter than it would be if we constantly approach things from an external fix. But the quicker we can get to an internal solution and operate from a stance of who we are and what we are, it's a little easier and it's a lot more available to us energy-wise if we do it from that side versus trying to. It's so easy to want to fix something where somebody is on the outside, but really taking a step back and going back to beginning and helping that person get back to beginning so that they're walking more than what we're carrying them. I think that's. I just wanted to add that's the the best way for us to approach it is trying to really get them to beginning for themselves as soon as we can, and help them moving forward. And there's just more energy involved in that. There's a little more of us available from the outside than if we're always trying to go in 5 different directions too, if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me.
And I hope I hope that helped too, Evelyn. Because sometimes, and I was trying to give an example of if someone trying to, we can all relate to just paying a bill or get caught up on a debt and tell this person, well, you're working, but hey, you can do this job, and but there's also a hustle you can do here, and so you're working 4 or 5 different jobs and things to pay something. Think about the time and energy it's taken you to amass that money to pay something versus taking the approach of getting yourself to a place of needing less and understanding that concept versus trying to do 4 or 5 different jobs or things or hustles, however, to pay for something that maybe the shift in mentality will actually bring you closer to a place of that being obtainable more, but more so from a need standpoint. And so I was just trying to give an example of that, how that looks. But and it takes a lot more energy to do those 5 jobs than it would to just center yourself in the place of, okay, let me see what I really need to do and start from there versus doing the 5 jobs to obtain something, if that's a good example for you. Any other questions or comments on that? Any other questions or comments on today in general?
I had a comment on, I guess that last question, that it connects to the European and African mindset. And as Nick was talking about earlier today, in regards to, I guess, approaching everything from the European standpoint, from an intellectual standpoint, and therefore where much of the confusion came in with the European was that nothing existed or wasn't true or wasn't real until it could be proven or understood from an intellectual standpoint. And from the African mindset, it was more so an accepting and a knowing, because it was more so of a connection with creation as a whole, and therefore the knowledge and the understanding was that of creation itself. Much of the, and I'm skipping some stuff, but much of the struggle that we talk about in terms of African Americans is going back and forth between those 2 different things, having a comfortability in the spirituality and confidence in relying on it, while also, I guess, being, and when I say assimilated, I don't even mean being assimilated by choice, but having to deal constantly, in a sense, in a world where intellect is championed and is actually what matters. So some of the struggles that we actually have in dealing with problems and feeling like we're carrying a huge burden is based upon the actual approaching problems from an intellectual standpoint versus a spiritual standpoint. And once we start, and I'm saying somewhat, so I'm not trying at all to be dismissive by any means, but to have the spiritual understanding and to be able to address or respond to certain situations as they're happening. It may not make sense, and you may not even realize, or we may not realize what we're actually doing. It's kind of like you're just on autopilot in a sense, and being led to do those things. As it relates to us being, I think, as you mentioned earlier today, that when they brought the African over here, they separated us, et cetera. And I was thinking to myself, not only did they separate us, but that was also more so a result of what they were experiencing already doing themselves, because the European mindset was always to divide things to try to understand it from an intellectual standpoint to the smallest pieces. And like Nick said, it was separated and it had no value in itself. And the European always felt separated itself and felt as an individual and did not feel a part of creation. So that was just a result of it physically doing, manifesting what it felt or what it was inside, in a sense. And I guess the last thing is that in terms of being afraid of Black people, mysticism, or anything that actually relates to spirituality, it is a fear because there is no understanding of it from an intellectual standpoint, and therefore not trusting it at all. I forget what Nick said. The meaning of the left was, but that's why we think of things like voodoo, black magic, anything like that. Nighttime, all of these things are just looked at as being mystical, but also not understood, and actually not adhering, in a sense, to the intellectual science that everyone accepts as understanding. I'm finished.
Thank you, sir. I totally agree. The almost instinctive fear reaction that the sort of that European mindset we've been talking about has to anything that is not it is, or anything that is spirit, or anything that is deemed to be outside of its jurisdiction, is exactly that. It's just fear of the unknown, and the method by which things can be known is not one that is comes naturally to that European mindset. And so, in other words, when they look out at the universe, it's a terrifying universe. When the African looks out at the universe, the African sees themselves. And this is one of the fundamental sort of fears or pathologies that informs that sort of confused European mindset's approach to all of reality. And that is the fundamental confusion that the African in the United States, in particular, is here to help correct.
That in itself, this part, that last part, Nick, what you mentioned is exactly what we see in capitalism, is exactly what we see as a result of slavery, was that idea of what you just said in terms of the European mindset being separate from all of creation, sees itself as its number one responsibility. What it has to do is it has to fight. It has to survive by any means necessary, meaning in part of that survival and fighting to survive means enslaving people and things like that. As it relates to capitalism, it means being selfish and trying to get things for itself in order to.
Hey, Sheldon, I think you cut off, but yes, the last thing I got was capitalism.
And providing these. So, yeah, there is no need to actually to fight. There's no need to go to war, as you just said, with your environment, with your world. You're not going to war with it. You're with it. It is loving, etc.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that to light. And let me add one last thing to that that I was thinking of. If you want a good example of that sort of confused pathological view of the entire universe that is characteristic of this confused European mentality, look at H.P. Lovecraft. So H.P. Lovecraft wrote, he came up with the Cthulhu and a bunch of other like scary sounding things, but I say that that is a good example of the fundamental fear that informs that pathology. And that might seem a little bit random and not necessarily relevant to this conversation, but in terms of trying to find a good example of how that confused mentality sees the rest of the universe, everything that H.P. Lovecraft wrote, and he was, by the way, a very, very big racist. But so when you see these kinds of examples and you can see behind them on a surface level and see into why they were created, or the mentalities and thought patterns and personalities of the people who create these kinds of things, you can see examples of all this stuff in what our culture produces, what European culture produces, what African culture produces, and trace back their connection to spirit and their approach to reality based on what they create.
I was trying to think about why what was happening in Ukraine has captured people's attention, when what happens in countries of color, or Syria, or anyway, countries of color don't seem to rise up to that level of attention. And it just reminds me that everything that's happening is magnified in a sense in terms of aggression of one nation against another nation, and not necessarily a people of color, but against itself. Because as Putin said, he viewed Ukraine as part of itself. And how does one do that on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, push away, try to take with greed? I thought of all of the 10 Commandments when I thought about what you actively see on a large scale and what's happening there. It's like an animal that tries to eat its own self, thinking that part of its own appendage is separate from it. And that's what I see playing out, not only in Ukraine. It just so happens that Ukraine just signifies on a macro level this animal attempting to eat itself. And I'm not talking about calling Putin an animal per se, although it does have animalistic tendencies. I'm just trying to make an example of when you don't know how connected you are, when you don't have a basis in the essence and under an awareness of the essence of who you are, then what you do is you strike out. You are greedy. You rape. You pillage. You destroy the other. But the other is really you.
The other is really you.
Yeah.
That is the fundamental confusion informing, or that is the fundamental mystery and thing that causes confusion underlying all of the universe and all of our relationships to everything in the universe, in every universe. And it is in resolving that fundamental problem that is the process of enlightenment, that is the process of the reconstitution of the original unity out of which this physical universe came. That thing that appears to not be you, that thing that appears to be, quote, other, is you. That's confusing, isn't it? Now, solve the problem. How? How can it be you, even though it does not appear to be you? That is the question. That's the only question. And Europeans are the most confused by it.
Does that confusion go back to denying of their identity?
Yes, that is an extension of the original confusion. Because in the European mentality that we've been speaking of, it defines, or rather describes, based on material circumstance and sensory experience. So to that confused identity, Black people can't be human because the definition of human is me, the European. So anything not me, by definition, cannot be human. So I can do whatever I want. It is fundamentally confused and pathological. And again, that's not all European, but that is the way in which that identity becomes, or rather that mentality becomes confused.
Nick, Europeans always said that Africans are not human. And they had it right, but it just had it backwards, because like you just said, we're not human. It's just something to think about. It's like everything that they've said is totally the opposite. It's to tear us down, mentally or whatever. But yeah, they've always said that we weren't human.
Yep. And just to explain what Ms. Evelyn just said, like we
Well,
are
we are human.
right, in the sense that we are not the sum total of what we are is not this physical sort of animal body that we inhabit anyway. One thing, here's another book series recommendation, and you can actually read it for free on the internet, but it is called The Law of One. Highly recommended. If you go to lawofone.info, you can read the whole thing. But I bring that up because one of the very opening statements made in that book series is that there is no right and wrong. There is no separation. There is only fundamentally identity. And it is the job of all entities with identity and who experience awareness to resolve the fundamental conflict that appears before them, which we've already stated. There appears to be something other than myself, and yet it is me. How? And that's the whole thing.
Is that not the conflict that Barbara brought up between Russia and the rest of the European world? They see Russia as the other, and have made a decision that they're going to control it as they do everything else. And they see the greatest opportunity to do that is right now because of the way that Biden gave the green light for the news media to denigrate Putin in the way that they are doing it, which means that, as she stated, the European concept, if you don't look like me, you are unworthy of being treated well. That concept being that they're going to destroy their own in order for them to control what they call themselves, or for them to be able to control everything in the world that does not function as they function. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Not even thought of that.
Any other questions or comments for the day? I think it's,
Yes, I didn't get all that when Evelyn was talking about us not being human. I mean, about being human, I didn't gather all of that. If she doesn't mind repeating it.
Evelyn, could you repeat that?
Yes, I was saying that they've always said the European concept that we were not human, and they made it to make us feel less of a human.
Okay, it's projection. The reason I wanted to make sure I got it is because I want us to be reminded that the thing that makes us human is embracing who we are, loving kindness, forgiveness, etc. That's all. I want to be sure I got it clear. Thank you. Okay, yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking of probably a good starting point for so many different things that kind of bring us back to when you get to the beginning. What are you gonna reflect on? What do you think about? So it's just a lot of information, a lot of good things there that really just kind of give you a little insight into what the mindset is and how much we actually need each other. And more and more we see that we are connected and that we can't operate in isolation. It makes everybody's path a little easier and a little clearer too, once you get to that point of your identity. And then where do you go from there? I thought it was a lot of answers and a lot of insight into that today.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. If there are any questions, we can put a pin in it for today and then pick up tomorrow. I really appreciate everybody, all the contributions and all the insight that was given today and yesterday. I thank everybody for that. And if nothing else, we'll put a pin in it for today and pick up tomorrow. So everybody have a good day, and I appreciate you.
Thank you. You do the same.
Take care, family.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.